You know, as a model builder, you come across a dilemma sometimes when you encounter a kit that gives you a bunch of options in order to render it. And most of the times, you have to make a decision, either go one way or the other. What do you do when you encounter this proverbial fork in the road? Well, the answer is actually remarkably simple. Build both. Hey everyone, this is John from sg-43.com, and I'm here today with a double feature model showcase video for these two Soviet sg-43 Goryunovs. The models in this video are both built for my own personal collection and are not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@sg-43.com. Both of these models are built predominantly out of the box. However, I went ahead and made some slight alterations to the two examples in order to bring them up to the condition that we have here. In this video, we're going to be reviewing the base starter kit as well as the modifications that went into these two examples in order to bring them up to the following condition. For those of you out there who are a fan of the channel and are getting a sense of deja vu, that's because this isn't the first time one of these 1/6 scale sg-43 models have been posted on this channel. I recently completed a whole model showcase video on another example of one of these 1/6 scale sg-43s. In fact, I have that particular model right here in my hand. As I mentioned in this model's video, this kit allows you to render this model in a multitude of different configurations. Well, after my experience with working on this one over here, I decided to pick up a couple more examples of the same kit in order to render it out in one of these two configurations that are present right here. In this video, we're going to be going over all of the model's functions as well as the alterations that were made to the model in order to better suit it for the role you see it with these two configurations. So stay tuned because there's going to be a bunch of info coming right at you. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around these two models. And these two models over here are the sg-43 Goryunov. The Goryunov is a light MG that was developed by the Soviet Union in the early phases of World War II, namely was adopted in 1943. Of course, it was designed by the weapons designer, Mr. Goryunov, and the weapon was intended to replace the then aging Maxim 1910, which was a water-cooled MG that was adopted by the Russian armed forces in, well, 1910. The sg-43 was intended to replace it because it is a much simpler design and utilized less resources, which at the time the Soviets really needed to be as efficient as possible. The sg-43 was still going to be chambered in the same cartridge as the 1910, being the 7.62 by 54 rimmed, and was going to utilize the exact same non-disintegrating link belts, which of course, by going with this route, streamlined logistics as well as also production. Unlike the Maxim, which was a water-cooled MG, the sg-43 was going to fire from an open bolt and was going to be air-cooled. The sg-43 entered service and saw service with the Soviet Union all throughout the remainder of World War II. The unique thing about the sg-43 was its carriage. Like the Maxim 1910 that came before it, it had this little wheeled wagon which made mobility of the unit much more easily done, but the sg-43 also had this really cool feature where the unit can be propped up and could either serve in an anti-air role or can possibly be used in a trench. Like with most military equipment, after the unit has been in service for a little while, some shortcomings with the design were noticed, and that is exactly what happened with the SG. The engineers went ahead and addressed some of these changes, and the final outcome was known as the SGM. The SGM most notably had a fluted barrel, which gave it a much more surface area for the unit to cool down, and it also lightened the weight up a little bit. Some of the other changes would include the addition of spring-loaded doors on the entry and exit points for the shell ejection port, as well as also for the belt entryways. Some other changes would also include a side-mounted charging handle, which differed drastically from the original pattern. However, even though the SGM and the sg-43 were modified, or I should say were developed from one another, both still utilize the exact same quick change barrel. So it is possible to take an SGM barrel and lock it into an sg-43 receiver, and the two units will work just fine. Both the sg-43 and the SGM saw service with the Soviet military and was widely exported to other satellite countries. During the Cold War, several other countries had licensed copies of both patterns of these MGs, and they too saw service with their respective militaries. The Soviets themselves would utilize the SGM and the sg-43 up until the 1960s timeframe, when they were eventually replaced by the PK and later the PKM as a general purpose MG. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when both of these models were first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here are the models at the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing 2 of these 1/6 scale sg-43 MGs from iHeartKit. With the way the kit is designed, you have the ability to render it in one of 4 different ways. And after I completed that model, I liked it so much that I had the urge to say, screw it, let me go ahead and build an example of each of those models, all 4 of them. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the third one because the vendor that I purchased these from AliExpress ran out. I basically cleaned them out. However, there is going to be a fourth, or I should say a part 3 of this video series where I'm going to do a model showcase video on that rendition. However, back to these 2 over here. So after the completion of that other model, I decided to go ahead and build an option of both of those. And I went to the vendor, purchased the models off of AliExpress, and about a month or so later, they came in and we're about ready to start on them. Well, since they are both the exact same kit, there's no point having both of them on the table. So let me go ahead and clean up the workspace, making it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so as I touched upon in the other video, the 1/6 scale sg-43 kit from iHeartKit is a relatively new addition to the marketplace, and was one that personally caught me off guard, as the whole iHeartKit company did for that matter. I'm not going to go too much into the background of the kit with the history and all that, because really more or less that's discussed in way more depth in the other video, and there's no point rethreading the same needle here. So, in a nutshell, the sg-43 kit from iHeartKit is actually from Trumpeter. Inside this box here, it's all Trumpeter tooling, and the design of the kit is Trumpeter execution, which needless to say is very, very good, and the kit does have a lot of cool features to it. It's kind of interesting to me that Trumpeter would go ahead and create a sister company called iHeartKit for these models here, because honestly I don't see why they would. The Trumpeter marquee is more than accepted in the modeling circles, and the kit's qualities are also really good. So the fact that they went ahead and skirted around and created their own separate company, I don't know, maybe there's something there. If someone knows that information, feel free to put that in the comment section listed below. Even the box art, even though it is super simple, it's Trumpeter with the way the graphic design is laid out, with the fonts that are used, and even some of their 1/72 scale kits had box arts akin to this with just a photograph of the real model, but now I'm going too much into depth. Anyway, cracking open the kit contents, you'll get to see what the model looks like on the inside. So here goes some more stuff from iHeartKit. Talked about that already in the other video. Instruction manual. So here goes the kit contents. Like I stated before, it's all Trumpeter tooling, only the pieces are molded in a green color, which is something that you would see on Trumpeter kits from the early 2000s time frame. However, even though the plastic itself is colored in this forest green coloring, the type of polystyrene is what you'll find on their standard kits. As I touched upon in the other video, the pieces are very simplistic and are very well laid out. However, although they are relatively simplistic, that doesn't mean they are not detailed. This kit does straddle line very well with simplicity and ease of construction, and also super detailing. And you'll see that later on as the video progresses when the 2 models are completed. Further in the box takes us to the culprit that really started the snowball rolling for this project. Right here, we have an option of 2 types of barrels. We have the standard sg-43 barrel, and then we have the other version, which is for the SGM. The SGM barrel is really cool because it has these flutes that are milled into the real unit. And with the way the kit is designed and the tooling that's found on this piece, they are so nice that in order to just ignore this and forever not build another example in this format is just foolhardy, because again, the execution of the model is that nicely done. These models are relatively affordable. I believe they're about 30 to 40 US dollars when found on AliExpress. Give or take a little bit for shipping, but regardless, they make for excellent models that are still relatively affordable. So again, I couldn't help myself. I had to just go ahead and acquire the whole 4 set. Now, as I stated before, I'm going to be building 4 of these in total. The last one I built as a standard sg-43 with the carriage, and it's basically the way you see it on the box art. However, for these 2 examples over here, one I'm going to be building it with the standard carriage with the wheels deployed. Only that one is going to be with the SGM barrel. However, I am going to be building a second sg-43. And of course, if you got to this point in the video, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've already seen it during the walk-around portion of the carriage being mounted in the anti-aircraft mode. This is a really cool feature found on the actual carriage, and again, it's something that gave me the light bulb after I completed the other example that I've already referenced. So, of the 2 units, here you get to see the standard configuration one, and this one has been fully completed, and of course, we'll be touching upon that in the next following scene. However, this one here is really more or less just built out of the box predominantly, with again, some of the modifications that I mentioned in the other sg-43 video. So there's nothing really too much to go over right now about this. If anything, I wanted to take the opportunity to showcase this unit that we have here. This one here is modeled in the AA configuration, and in order to render this in this format, you do have to make some certain modifications to the kit piece in order to just wring out a little bit more detail fidelity. At this point here, this model is fully assembled with all of the kit components, and at this point it's ready to slide off into paint. However, before I go ahead and do that, I just wanted to take the opportunity to show off some of the modifications that were made to the model to bring it up to this condition, because it's really best done now as opposed to when everything is fully painted and weathered. So starting with the sg-43 itself, this here is built out of the box with nothing really much to mention in terms of the external detailing. However, one modification that I made in order to get this to fit into the AA mount involves the 2 integral lugs that we have right here on the bottom portion of the receiver. With the way the sg-43 is designed, you do have these 2 lugs that are integrally built in for the purposes of mounting it to, well, this cradle system. The way the kit is designed, you have these 2 pieces that are solid. This one here is drilled out for this purpose. However, on the bottom portion, there is this peg that descends from either section. The peg is there in order for it to lock into the, hang on, give me a second, the main cradle section here of the mount itself. On the mount, you will also have 2 corresponding holes located in these 2 locations. This design is excellent because it just makes the pieces drop directly into place, and it does streamline a bit of the assembly. However, although this works fantastic if you're going to mount it in the standard configuration, if you're going to go with the AA version, you do need to make some modifications to it, and one of which is the deletion of those pegs. Those pegs obviously are there just so it locks into the kit mount here, but if you do not have it mounted in that configuration, the pegs are a bit of an obtrusive item and can actually hurt the look of the setup. So they're simply just snipped away with a clean cut snip and then polished away with some sandpaper. Circling back to the hole that I mentioned before, this one here in the front has the hole present in order so you can model the unit in this format like I touched upon before. However, the one in the back is molded solid. Well, if you are going to model it in this format, it would behoove you to drill out that section over there just to get the detailing that would be present on the real unit. This is only if you're building it in the AA roll. If you're just building the standard infantry configuration, obviously that's not necessary. On the front lug and also for the corresponding hole found on the tripod, like I just mentioned, they are present. However, the tolerances on these sections are very, very tight. So much so that if you try to install the kit supplied pin without any sort of fine adjustments made to these areas over here, you're going to succeed in breaking the pin. So if you are going to model in this format, be sure to expand the holes in these locations slightly with a pin vise with a small Dremel bit. And that's basically all that needs to be done to the MG and to the main cradle itself. However, the next thing that I need to touch upon for modifying for the AA use is with the main cradle. As I mentioned before, there are 2 holes integrally molded into these 2 sections over here, which allow the MG to just plug directly into place. But obviously, if you're modeling it in the AA mode, this is definitely something that needs to be addressed because you can have these 2 unsightly holes found in these 2 areas over here. These are simply plugged up with 2 lengths of plastic rod that were the same size, and I just simply insert them into the locations and polish them away with the bodywork. Once everything is painted, they will blend in seamlessly. The other thing I want to mention involves the pins themselves. Obviously, on the real unit, 2 lock pins are positioned on the front and the rear, and they hold the unit in place. Well, with the unit removed, you are going to have to make some modifications. One is on the front portion over here. You'll notice I drilled a hole directly through the 2 mounting lugs. This is going to be because when the unit is mounted in the back, it uses the rear pin, or I'm going to have it modeling rendering the rear pin. So the front pin is still going to be connected to this section over here. Because of that, you are going to have the visible detailing of the rod that comes across from the pin, and this is going to be added after the unit is fully painted with a length of metal wire. The wire is just going to slide into this location over here, and it's going to replicate very well the look of the pin itself. The molded in section was remaining because there's no reason to cut that off. On the one on the back, however, it required a little bit more modifications. You'll notice that the pin was completely amputated. The stock molded in pin, which looked like this one over here, was snipped away with a clean cut snip, and then I went ahead and drilled the unit out thoroughly through and through. This one here will have absolutely no pin present, and it's just going to be in the open position because, again, I'm rendering it where the unit was just designed to use one of these pins in order to hook the MG in this roll over here. So you could use the front one or the rear one. But for this example, I'm rendering it where it's using the rear one. Luckily, the kit supplies you with the pin itself for this purpose, and that one is going to be used at that time. One other thing I want to mention about the cradle is that on both the ammo chute and the ammo can holder, you have some injection pin or mold lines that are present in the reverse areas of both of these 2 locations. This is something that is very easily polished away with some fine sandpaper. However, on this version over here with the AA mount, it's actually even more important to hit these because of the visibility of these locations, because the receiver is not in the way, obstructing the view. Of course, this procedure I undertook on all of the sg-43s that I've made in infantry or AA use. However, on the AA one, it's definitely more noteworthy to point out because of just the visibility factor found on this particular example. One last thing I want to touch upon is with the ammo can. The ammo can itself is the iHeart Kit Supply one, and it is actually very nicely rendered, as I touched upon in the other sg-43 video. However, it does leave some room for improvement. The first is the top portion here. You'll notice that I went ahead and fabricated the handle and handle strap details that are present on this example here. This was completely left vacant on the stock iHeart Kit version, and it's something that is a bit of a ding on the kit. For one reason or another, they decided to omit this detailing. However, fortunately, it's really easy to fabricate. What you see here are thin strips of aluminum that I cut from a soda can, and I was able to bend them to the shape that you see here, and once bent, they just drop directly into place. If you are going to be fabricating this detailing, it would help to also bend the ends 2 or 3 times on both of the end sections on the strap, because on the real sg-43, there are steel clamps found in these areas over here. Not really clamps, more like end points on the canvas to prevent them from fraying, and more importantly, it actually locks them into this area over here and it prevents the strap from falling out. By bending the aluminum a few times, this is a great way to mimic that type of detailing. The other modification that I made, and this was one that I always make to these 1/6 scale MG ammo cans, is with the hinging. The piece, again, is fully hinged, and it's hinged in 2 locations, as it is on the real unit. However, this kit gives you the hinge pins made out of very thin molded plastic rods. And this is something that's always problematic. They never really work out too well. It's more of a cost-cutting procedure, if that. It's really difficult to snip them clean them off, and then insert them into the hole. And once they are in there, they tend to break. So that was just from my personal experience with working on these things for all this time. One super easy trick to do to remedy this is to simply omit the plastic pins and replace them with ones made from metal. While also on the ammo can lid, I do want to mention the interior section here. The way the kit is designed, you have these 6 injection pin marks found on the interior location. These are simply polished away with a little bit of red putty with some fine sandpaper to blend everything together. Once the unit's polished down, it really does improve the look of the piece overall, specifically if you're going to leave this unit in the open position, which if you're displaying it in the ammo can holder over here with the ammo belt coming out, you kind of are stuck in that type of format. So it would really, really be a good idea to go ahead and polish those sections down further. One last thing about the iHeart Kit ammo can involves the little latch pin that we have right here. With the way these Russian ammo cans work is that when you want to open it, first the tab is closed in this format and it goes flush against the side, and then you have these two little lugs found on this pin, and when it's in the horizontal state, it keeps everything locked together. When you want to open it, you simply just twist it to the vertical position, and then you could open up the ammo can in this type of format. The detailing is supplied with the piece, however, is very finely molded and is not meant to be functional. It's just meant to be set and forget. So if you want to render this piece, I like to render it in the vertical position because this allows the can to be open and closed like you see here, and allows me to stow the ammo belt on the inside. If you just want to keep it in the closed state, that's fine. You just basically assemble it with the tab down and with the piece fitted in the horizontal location. Once that's done, the piece is fully completed. However, you do lose the cool feature of having the piece function, and with the piece being nicely molded as it is, it's kind of a shame. Starting with the infantry version of this model, this rendition here is basically just rinse, wash, and repeat from the other sg-43 model that I built and did a video of a little while ago. The only real difference is that this version here has the fluted barrel. The weathering is a little bit different in comparison to the other example, but the real major change is with the color itself. The color on the last version was Tamiya olive green that I went ahead and added some filters and other techniques to it in order to bring it up to the condition you saw in that video. While this one over here, this was a shade of Russian olive drab that I went ahead and concocted a little while ago for use on the various Russian armor builds that I have in the lineup. The paintwork itself received the same type of fading and filtering effects that I generally mention in these videos. The unit is fully functional in that it can elevate the press as well as pivot left and right. One other feature that I built into this model that I foolishly left out of the other example was with the shield. The shield on the sg-43 is a removable part, although realistically it's very seldomly removed in field. But with the way the kit is designed, they did it the right way where it's a separate piece and it slides into the mounts that we have right here. The only difference is that on the real one there is this vise type handle that you thread down and it tightens onto the steel, keeping it in place. Obviously, for the model here, the piece is just for looks. However, on this one, instead of gluing the shield in place, I simply just didn't, and the piece is held on purely with friction. So if I grab the unit and pull straight up, you can see that the shield is still fully removable. With the shield removed, it really makes the unit look very different in comparison to the way it looked earlier. With the shield removed, you also really get a better glimpse of the sg-43 itself. With the camera brought in closer, you can see the weathering work that went into the model here. The worn surface look is done with my typical dry brushing techniques, and I have thoroughly mentioned and discussed this in another tutorial video, which the link can be found in the video description listed below. Basically, it's just done purely with dry brushing, and the airbrush is then used right here on the muzzle end to give it that powder fouling look, which of course would be more than appropriate for a unit like this. Something else to mention about the weathering work is with the piston that we have right over here on the bottom. The piston on the sg-43 is similar to like what you'll see on other Degtriev designs like the RPD or the DSHK, where it's connected to the bulk carrier group and the end of the piston is right over here. Basically, when the round is fired, hot gases go into this section over here, blow into this little cup, to which then the piston actuates and it cycles the action. On the Russian MGs, the pistons are generally or almost always exclusively chromed plated, and this is done to just make cleanup a little bit easier and also to cut down on the corrosion. It also adds a bit to the reliability that Russian weapons are really known to have. Well, on the model over here, the piston is rendered into the piece and it is nicely done. The only thing you have to do as a model builder is to just simply paint the piston with some kind of silver or chrome type coloring, and then with the use of the airbrush I went ahead and added a little toot of black right over here, obviously to simulate the powder fouling which will most definitely accumulate in this section over here, specifically after the unit is fired a bunch of times. The other thing to mention is the carry handle. As you can see, it is fully functional in that it can pivot from left to right, and this is as per the kit, but as a builder you have to be careful with this because these surfaces where the glues are added are very, very small and are somewhat on the frail side. It is something that obviously is doable, but you want to take your time and be careful with the glue application. If that is properly done, the piece will be able to pivot like the way you see on this model here. Also, you have to pay attention to the orientation. It's very easy to install this in reverse, and if that's the case, you're pretty much going to be screwed because you're going to have to rip it open in order to remount it in the appropriate direction. On the piece itself, there is a seam that runs along the bottom portion over here, and this is something that needs to be polished away by the builder prior to the unit going into paint. Fortunately, something that's very easily done with a little bit of super glue and some fine sandpaper, and after a few moments of sanding and polishing, the unit will blend in absolutely seamlessly. On the paintwork, well, that's also relatively easily done. The handles on all of the sg-43s tend to be made out of a Bakelite material, and on the model here, it is decently rendered where we have the mounting fasteners nice and pronounced compared to the remainder of the handle material itself. However, what isn't molded in is the detailing of the seam work, which would be found separating the grips from the metal spine that we have right here. On the real unit, think of it like your kitchen knife, where you have those two wood panels or plastic panels, and then they're secured on either end of the knife blade itself. It's much along the exact same lines. So on the model over here, in order to get this feature in place, all you have to do as a builder is with a very fine precision paintbrush to only paint the Bakelite areas on either side and leave the metal portion untouched, as you see here on this model. If you do this, the model will definitely have better accuracy compared to just painting the entire thing to resemble Bakelite or possibly wood. One other thing to mention about the grips is that you'll see how the look of the Bakelite really does give the model so much extra added color and vibrance compared to just painting them either in a flat color or trying to use some other technique. The Bakelite was predominantly a reddish-brown color, which was typically seen on other Russian and other European and American weapon grips of the era. For the Bakelite material itself, I like to use Tamiya Hull Red, and then I go over it once it's fully dry with Tamiya Clear Lacquer, or Clear Base, I believe it's called. Regardless, it just brushes onto the surfaces, and once it's set, it really leaves for a nice amber look like the way you see it here. And that's all there is to mention about the infantry configuration, so let's go ahead and shift our gears and focus primarily now on the anti-aircraft configuration of this unit. Unfortunately, with the size and with the shape of this thing, it's really hard to get it all in frame in one go, so let's go ahead and do this in the piecemeal type format. Starting with the paint and the weathering work, the techniques used on this example here are identical to the ones mentioned in the infantry unit that I just went over. The only difference though is that with this one here, I actually went ahead and added the small rack numbers found right here on this portion of the receiver. As I often mention in these MG videos, the addition of rack numbers is something that always gives a little bit of extra character and spice to your model, as opposed to just leaving it blank without any sort of rack numbers painted. Obviously, that is also perfectly fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if you just want to add a little bit of extra flavor to your build and uniqueness, a rack number is a really easy way to do it. The rack numbers have been used by militaries on their small arms for the last 100 or so years, so applying the numbers is something that can be done by just about any country during almost any era. For this version over here, I went with a hand-painted type format, but I have seen examples with stencils that have been used as well. As for which one or what colors to use, well, really, that's all up to you and your choice of preference. For this example, this was all done by a paintbrush and was done by hand. Obviously, I use a very small paintbrush to do so, and the color is flat white. As for the typeface, this is something that I've personally seen on many Russian and other European small arms throughout the years, and generally when I've seen these type of numbers, they're generally scribbled into the metal IDing components, but I've seen this typeface even painted on the side of several other vehicles and other bits of Russian equipment. The other thing to mention about the paintwork involves this side here of the receiver. As I touched upon before, the bolt carrier group and the piston linkage, which is basically all one piece, is all chrome plated. And this is something that's not really easily seen when this unit is built in the infantry configuration, and it's one of the perks of building it in the AA format. The ejection port is right over here on the sg-43, and it's this very distinctive parallelogram, I guess, type shape. And with the way the SG-43 is that when the bolt is closed, you will actually see the bolt carrier group in this section right over here. This is nothing more than just the side portion of the BCG, and because of that, you want to paint this with the same chrome color that you painted the piston that I touched upon earlier. Once this is done, it really gives the unit a nice, distinctive final look to it, and it's something that definitely fits the part very nicely. Hopping back to the other side takes us to the ammo belt, and this is something that I touched upon in the other SG-43 video, and that is the kit does supply you with a very nicely rendered ammo belt. The ammo belt itself is made out of standard plastic, and this is arguably one of the weaker points of the kit because it is not flexible. So if you're modeling the unit, you basically want to pick one type of configuration and leave it, because the belt here can't be moved or switched around in order to achieve different types of animation type effects. For this unit over here, because it's in the AA roll, and generally the way the model is displayed is in this type of configuration, you can see that the ammo belt is clipped into the feed paw area of the top cover, and then it'll just simply descend downward. Well, because of the way these links are, which on the real one is a non-disintegrating link belt, it will tend to just have this even flow to it, like the way you see how I rendered it on this model over here. With the way the piece is rendered with this type of plastic, this does allow the builder to conform the plastic belt into this type of configuration, but you do have to be careful when doing this, because the biggest weak point of the belt in this configuration is right over here where it emerges from the entry point. The belt needs to be inserted in a straight manner, and then you need to bend it diagonally and also curve it downward in order to achieve the realistic look of the belt. And this is something that can be done, but you have to be really careful with it, because once this plastic here snaps, you're not going to be able to really glue it back together again. So care must be exhibited by the builder. On this one here, I don't remember if I used a heat gun or a hair dryer, but I believe I did. I want to say I did, in order to soften the plastic, which made it a little bit more pliable. However, this is a very, very risky procedure, and you can easily screw it up, and screw up to the point where the whole belt becomes useless. So again, care must be exhibited by the builder when you're messing around with the ammo belt. The next thing to mention is the belt's paintwork, and this is something that I have touched upon in the other video, but you know, it's still relevant for this one here, so I'll briefly go over it. The belts that are used on the SGs are the same belts used on the Maxim M1910s and are still in use by the Russians today on the PK and the PKM. It's classic case of it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, the cartridge itself goes back to the 19th century, but no, I'm digressing. As for the belts themselves, like I mentioned before, they are non-disintegrating, and if you ever see them in person, they are this shiny black type material. However, flat black will do the job just fine, and it will actually have a nice little sheen to it, believe it or not. The paintwork is done first with spray paint. The entire belt is spray painted with flat black. Then, with a paintbrush, I carefully paint the brass sections of the casing, and the paint that I use is generally just gold spray paint specifically. Once the casings are painted in gold, I then switch over to a copper color, and for a while, and the one that you see on this model here is actually Tester's little bottle enamel copper paint, which you can find in any hardware store or craft store for the longest time. I'm not sure if it's still in production, but regardless, copper paint's the way to go, and this is obviously for the projectiles themselves. The projectiles are full metal jacket. There are other projectiles out there in this caliber for tracer and I believe armor piercing, and there are different markings to paint those, but that's if you really want to go the extra next step. For me, I just went all with ball ammo like you see here. The other thing to mention is that the brass is only found on one side of the belt. On the opposite side, on these com block belts, you can see that there are no brass sections exposed, as this is the backing here of the belt itself. Once the paintwork is completed on the belt, it definitely does an excellent job with replicating the detailing, and it gives the model so much extra coloring. Temporarily hopping back to the infantry version brings us to the belt and the can itself, and all of the information that I just went over is going to be valid for this example over here. However, where it's different is with the way the belt needs to emerge from the can and enter into the feed cover. Obviously, the paintwork is going to be identical, but with this one over here, the belt needs to flow from the can up and then into the feed tray cover, and this requires a little bit of extra finesse by the builder in order to have the belt contort in all these directions and have it done in a natural looking pose. And this is something that is a little bit trickier compared to what one may think. The exact same techniques about bending the belt were utilized on this example over here. However, with this one, the builder has to pay a little bit more attention and be more cautious compared to the other example, because the belt has more complex bends to it in comparison to the other example. The other one really just focused in this area over here, while this one you have a few more bends to contend with, and then you have to get it to fit inside of the can and do in a way that looks natural. It's also because of this type of material over here, which is why making this model as a convertible model from infantry to AA is one that's not really beneficial, nor is it something that's really going to be practical. As one might imagine, this is the type of material that you have really one chance in bending and getting it right, because after you try to move it around and try to rebend it again, it's just going to crumble on you. So definitely that's something that is not recommended. Moving down from the MG brings us to what is normally the carriage and or mount. And in this configuration, it's hard to really label it. It's not a tripod, it's not a monopod, it's just a tilted up wagon is the best way I think I can put it. But regardless, here you get to see what it looks like in its AA configuration now fully completed. Of course, the unit can still pivot up and down, that doesn't change, and the unit can still pivot from side to side, but that doesn't really mean all that much when you have it in this type of configuration. As I touched upon before, the shield is something that you have to have in this format, because this little tab here actually digs into the ground and it acts as an anchor, keeping the unit in place. For this one, I went ahead and painted it slightly different compared to the other examples. You can see that the actual mounts that secure the receiver to the carriage over here are painted in black, and I also did the same type of thing for the adjustment knob found here on the bottom. The weathering was all done in my usual configuration, much along the lines as the entire carriage itself. The entire wagon is painted with a different shade of Russian green that I've touched upon in a number of other Russian build videos that I've done on the channel, and I utilize the same weathering techniques on this as I touched upon in those other videos. Once it's done, it really has a nice overall look to it. And this green here is very different compared to the green that I used on the other sg-43. So again, I have 3 examples of the same type of kit, and no 2 of them, or 3 of them for that matter, look alike. Of course, when you're painting the wheels on the SG are steel rimmed, like you see here, and this was painted via paintbrush, and the color that I used was Vallejo silver paint. Simply just brush it onto the surfaces over here, and once the bodywork is properly done during the building phase, after the paint is added, you can see that's a nice smooth surface that you see presently, and this is as per the real unit. After building this example here in the AA format, there's one thing that I do have that's a critique on the model as a whole, and that is with the shield. The shield is nicely shaped, and I like the way that they rendered it with the appropriate thickness of the piece. However, if you are building this unit in the AA configuration, the shield is arguably one of the weaker aspects of the model. Because of the way the unit leans forward and rests on the foot over here of the shield, it will tend to have a little bit of weight in this area, and that may have a little bit of flex added to the shield. If I set the model down and let it go, you'll see how it bent forward just a little bit. Not a whole lot, but it is something that is present. Is it enough to be a deal breaker? In my opinion, no, but it is something that I did want to mention. If you are working on the model in this configuration, if this is something that definitely is a turnoff for you, the best solution is to make a brand new shield here, but don't use plastic as a medium. You want to use metal. You could find some sheet galvanized steel that's the same exact thickness, and just basically bend it to the geometry that you see on this model here. Use the plastic one as a template, basically trace and cut it out, and then once that's inserted in place, it'll have far more rigidity to it compared to the plastic counterpart that is present on this example. This is why I mentioned before that this kit is really more or less designed to be in the infantry configuration, and the anti-aircraft version was more or less just an afterthought, or was a more or less a why not type feature. But that is something that I do want to mention. The very last thing I want to mention is with the cans themselves. Obviously, here you get to see what the cans look like fully completed, and as I touched upon before, both cans have the scratch-built straps present in place. These straps, now fully painted, you really get to appreciate the material that they would have been on the real examples. The strap is a webbing cloth canvas type material, while the strap end connectors are metal sections that are just crimped over in place. The paintwork on the cans, you can see, are also very different. This example over here, I painted with the same exact color that I used on the carriage on the other example, and then vice versa for this one over here. Again, this is a way to add a little bit of extra character and color pop to your builds. And at the end of the day, no surprise here, I couldn't be any happier on how these two models turned out. As I mentioned in the first SG-43 video, the iHeart Kit SG-43 model is an excellent example of a 1/6 scale model kit that's made out of polystyrene, is relatively affordable, and it's also relatively easily come by. This is something that is not really that common on the marketplace, and this does leave the kit to stand out amongst its peers. The kit's subject matter itself is very interesting, and more importantly, the execution of the kit is equally as nicely done. Obviously, you can render this model in a multitude of configurations, which does give extra mileage to the kit. Me personally, I am going to pick up an extra one of these models so that I can build it in the anti-air roll, but rather than using the fluted barrel, I want an example with the smooth barrel like we have over here. However, that's best left for another video for another time. Back to the two examples that we have here. As for skill level and recommendation, well, this is just going to be rinse, wash, and repeat from what I mentioned in the first SG-43 video. These kits here are really simplistic to put together, and because of that, a beginner can tackle one of these builds. If you have basic modeling experience, one of these SG-43 kits here should be something to look into if interested. The subject matter, again, I find to be very, very fascinating and cool, and again, with the way iHeart Kit did the execution, it makes for a very enjoyable and very nicely detailed and rewarding build once completed. One thing that I do want to state, though, that if someone is a beginner, I don't recommend going with the AA version, because this one here will require you to go outside of several of the kit's confines, and you are going to have to make some modifications to the kit in order to bring it up to this configuration. Obviously, I touched upon that in this video and how to execute those mods, but if someone is a beginner and they don't exactly have the tools or the skill sets required to undertake those modifications, it's best just to skip this one for now and to just stick with the standard infantry mounted variant. On a similar note, if someone is interested in buying one of these kits and having it as a convertible type model, in that, you know, you have the one model and you can go ahead and convert it either in this configuration or this configuration by just not gluing parts on in a certain way, this is something I would also hazard against. You see, with the way the kit is designed, it's really designed to be built in this configuration with the infantry mode. If you try to go ahead and make it for the anti-aircraft version, you do have to make those same modifications. And because of that, you're not going to be able to switch between the two. Also, by doing this just lends itself, from my personal experience, to leading up for things getting broken or damaged. And it's really something that you don't want to mess around with. If you are interested in having a model in both the infantry mode as well as in the anti-aircraft mode, I recommend doing what I did over here, where you simply build each of them in their own dedicated format. Either have one in a dedicated infantry mode or another one in the dedicated anti-aircraft mode. By doing this, it's basically having your cake and eating it too. And again, because of the relatively low cost and availability of these kits, this makes this aspect something that is very appealing and is something that can be had with minimal amount of effort as well as investment. For recommendations, an obvious one would be anyone who's into 1/6 scale action figures. If you're into World War II action figures, post-World War II action figures, or even contemporary military action figures, the SG-43 kit here is something to look into. If you're into World War II small arms, Russian military history, even though that's not really that popular right now, but regardless, this kit here would be a nice addition to add to your collection as well. As I often mention, this kit would also be recommended for anyone who's into or is curious about entering into the 1/6 scale hobby, but do not have the funds or the space available for something like a tank or a Jeep or something like that. Well, the SG-43 kit here is a way to scratch that itch, put your little toe into the water, so to speak, to see, how much you enjoy it or not. Along similar lines, if anyone is a fan of model miniature weaponry, these kits here would definitely be a nice addition to add to your bookshelf and or collection. And with that, that wraps up this double feature model showcase video for these two, technically three, 1/6 scale Russian sg-43 Goryunov MGs. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on model showcase videos like these ones over here, or the other smaller and larger scale model showcase videos and project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of all three of the models that you see here, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on the channel previously. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.